here. Okay, so what we will look at today is we're going to look at chapter 5, and there actually aren't that many disorders in this chapter. It's a relatively brief chapter in some respects, but we'll talk a little bit about how stress affects our body, right? How our body responds to stress. And then we'll look at two main disorders of stress, which are PTSD and acute stress disorder. And then a little bit at the dissociative disorders, which are another category within this umbrella. Really rare, but really, really interesting. So a few minutes here, we'll talk about just stress in general and how our body tends to respond. And we just finished talking about an exam, right? And school tends to be stressful. College students notoriously are stressed out, right? I don't probably have to tell you what stress is. You're probably familiar with feeling it. I feel like I had a stressful morning, so I kind of feel like that dude right there this morning, trying to let that go. Stress is something that's a state of tension or strain, right? And it's also a little bit of a process where we perceive and respond to any kind of events that we would call a stressor. A stressor is anything that stresses you out. It could be an exam, it could be technology, it could be timing, it could be traffic, it could literally be anything, right? And we all tend to have different stressors. Yeah. I don't have one, but you can see if, oh, like he had one for it, right? I'm like, I have a chalk thing, but I don't know if that will help you. So literally anything, right? And we all have our buttons for what stresses us out. Stress is something that's more about how we view an event than the event itself. Like every single one of us could experience the same stressor and react to it very differently. Like traffic, for example. Some people are really stressed out by traffic. It doesn't tend to bother me because I'm ridiculously early to everything. So I tend to have plenty of time for it. But my partner can't stand traffic. She starts like swearing and yelling at the cars in front of her and like gets really, really mad. And my kids then start repeating it, which is kind of funny, but kind of not, depending on what she said. But everybody has their things that stress them out. And so a big part of stress is, again, how we view events. And that tends to shape how we then experience them. Now, what we see in the body is that our body tends to react pretty intensely to stress. There's a lot of things going on in our system whenever we're stressed out. And I want to kind of summarize this in a different way up here on the board. So if we take any kind of stressful event, an exam, a wedding, right? You can also have good stress as a side note. So take something like an exam, for example. When you experience that stress, it's going to activate a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is this tiny structure, right, that tends to play a big role in homeostasis and balance of different systems. And it also activates a couple of different parts of the nervous system and endocrine system when we're stressed out. It's the first thing that happens. So when there's a stressor, the hypothalamus becomes alerted, and it's going to activate two different systems within your body. One of them, the autonomic nervous system, and the other is the endocrine system. And these two are working together at the same time. They just react in slightly different ways. The autonomic nervous system is part of our nervous system organization. So let me go, I'm going to come back to this slide. But just as a quick side note, if you're like, where is the autonomic nervous system? The nervous system divides twice, right, into the peripheral and central nervous system. Central nervous system is just the brain and spinal cord, right? They're kind of big things, right? But the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is everything else. And it divides into the autonomic and then the somatic nervous systems. And this one divides one more time into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So just as a point of context, right, the autonomic nervous system is one of the divisions of the peripheral nervous system, controlling kind of all of the automatic things that we do, very involuntary and automatic activities. And the autonomic sounds a lot like automatic, if that helps you to remember, all of the automatic involuntary kind of functions. And so when this system gets activated, it's going to release neurotransmitters through our nervous system, right, and cause us to have a stress response. At the exact same time, the endocrine system is being activated. And the endocrine system plays a really big role in hormones and hormonal influences, which are going to come from the different glands that make up this system. The pituitary gland, the adrenal glands, the thyroid, the pineal gland, and then the reproductive glands as well. So both of these at the exact same time are releasing different hormones and neurotransmitters into our system, which causes us to have a physical reaction to stress. So a little bit more about each one. From the autonomic nervous system side, we have two divisions. We have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And these two different systems are part of that autonomic nervous system, and they control a lot of our responses to emotions. Stress is one of those, right? It could also be anxiety or anger, or falling in love or feeling happy. All of those things are very much controlled by these systems. And when we feel stress or anxiety, our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. And it's in charge of things like fight or flight. We could add freeze, fight, flight, freeze. Say that 5 times fast, right? Freeze. Can't do it. But this one arouses us. It gears us up to fight off a stressor or kind of retreat from a stressor. And then when something is gone and we've dealt with it, the parasympathetic calms us down. It's in charge of resting and digesting, which sounds much nicer than fight or flight. So these things together control a lot of those automatic involuntary activities. When we're stressed out, our heart tends to beat faster, digestion shuts down. We might get sweaty palms, right? We breathe a little bit quicker. All of that energy that we would normally use for other things gets routed to help us deal with that stress. And then when the stress is gone, the other side of the coin helps us to calm back down. And so these nervous systems, again, release neurotransmitters, things like norepinephrine, plays a really big role in like our stress response. It's one of the more common neurotransmitters to be released when we're stressed out. And that causes us to have that fight or flight kind of reaction, gearing us up to deal with whatever is stressing us out. And at the exact same time, the other side of the coin, right, the endocrine system, is activating those different glands and something that we call the HPA pathway, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathway, causing us to release all of these different hormones into our system to give us a longer, kind of slower response to stress. So here we're releasing things like cortisol or ACTH. They're two very common stress hormones that are released into our body. And between all of these things going on, right, when we're stressed, we feel it. We get headaches and stomach aches, and we feel that like exhaustion and that toll that it can take on us. And this can be something that's very short term, or it can be something that's longer lasting, which we'll talk about in a moment when it comes to like some of the disorders like PTSD and so on. So a lot of things happening in the body when we're stressed, a lot of different like biological changes in response to the way we view events and perceive them in our environment. Any questions or thoughts or comments or anything? We won't go too much deeper than that. We'll talk a little more about kind of some of the tolls that this can take in chapter 8, which we'll cover in our next unit. But for now, just knowing that this does affect our system and cause a lot of physical elements to happen, I think is kind of key. All right. So rather than talking about like typical stress, what we're worried about more in this chapter is extreme stress, which we could also call trauma. Right? If someone experiences extreme stress, we can call that like a traumatic event at the same time. They're kind of synonymous. And there are two disorders that can emerge when people experience trauma. One of them is called acute stress disorder, and the other post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Most people are familiar with the idea of PTSD. It's a very commonly talked about disorder, but acute stress disorder is actually way more frequently occurring. It just doesn't last as long. The only difference between these two disorders is how long it takes for it to start and how long it lasts. So acute stress disorder happens almost right away after a traumatic event. So something traumatic happens, and within 4 weeks, a person starts to develop symptoms and struggle with that trauma. But it lasts less than a month. It might not be the most sensitive thing, but the way I've always remembered this is it's just a cute little stress disorder, right? Like it's small, right? Whatever helps you to remember it. But it doesn't last very long, right? So it's much more minor, though the symptoms that people experience are the same between the two of them. So acute stress disorder happens very quickly. So let's say somebody has a traumatic car accident, and within a couple of days or weeks, they start to develop some of the symptoms we'll talk about in a moment, but they go away relatively quickly. We would diagnose them with acute stress disorder. Yeah.
It's like a hard bed.
Yeah. If it's over a month, then you would change the diagnosis to PTSD. I mean, typically, like let's say it goes away like a week after that, then you might remove the diagnosis. But traditionally, if it lasts longer than that, then we would diagnose PTSD. So it might be that you start out with acute stress disorder and then it escalates or stays and becomes PTSD. Sometimes these change a little bit as like they either persist or go away. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, same thing, something traumatic happens, and then you start to experience a bunch of different symptoms from it, but they last a lot longer. And sometimes with PTSD, this doesn't happen right away. It can be something that happens like weeks or months later, but it does tend to be something that is a much longer lasting disorder. Some people struggle with it for the rest of their lives, or at least on average, like 5 to 7 years after the trauma, depending on the traumatic event. Anyone in here know someone with PTSD, someone in your life who has struggled with it, or a couple of people? Any thoughts or stories and anything at all? I'm like mortified that I might have called them. Anything at all that? Yeah. Yeah, right. And that's such a traditional presentation of it, right? This actually originated from people going off to war. In the beginning, I can erase this. Maybe. Look, like I don't have an eraser. It's been one of those days, I'm telling you. So shell shock syndrome. So this was originally called shell shock syndrome because it was thought that people who went off to combat or war situations would develop this disorder. But then we broadened it to realize that it could be anything, right? It could be any kind of trigger. It could be combat, or it could be more of like a natural disaster, some kind of assault or attack, a terrorist attack. It could be a car accident, really anything that we view as traumatic. But the original thought and presentation was very much like that. Like people would go off to war and they would come home and they'd be having nightmares and flashbacks. A car would backfire and they're like instantly back in combat, or firework goes off and their eyes are wide and wild and they're like reacting like they were back in combat situations. But it doesn't always have to be combat. It can be anything traumatic. There were a couple other hands. Anyone else? People in your life with PTSD? Any comments or?
Even now, still a little. She did this like a change just if like let's say like someone that's a little too close to our car or something like that, she like it's really things.
Sure, right. And some of that you would expect, right? Like some of that seems a little bit normal. I hate to say this, but most of us at some point in our life will experience something traumatic, right? Whether that's a car accident or maybe an attack, or somebody in our life suffers something like that. Like there are, unfortunately, a lot of things that happen to us along the way of life, right? And it's not abnormal to react to them, right? Like if you got into a car accident, I would say it's pretty normal to be maybe a little afraid when you get in the car. Or let's say the car accident happened at night. So every time you drive at night, maybe you're a little more anxious than you would be during the day. Or every time you go through the intersection or the area where you had that accident, you get a little more like nervous or anxious or kind of seize up a little bit. I would say that's pretty normal, but when people stop driving or they're not willing to get in that car anymore, then you kind of transition to something more severe. Yeah.
Question follow-up. PTSD is insurance psychology, and like how often Talk a little bit.
So people who tend to go to therapy for it and work through it tend to get better and get over it. You have to, unfortunately, in order to have it go away, you oftentimes have to face the trauma, right? And so it can get worse before it gets better. And so sometimes people don't want to do that, right? Having to head on face the trauma and work through it can be a little bit scary and intimidating. But people who do that tend to get much, much better. It's almost like you take the power away from the traumatic event. But if you don't do any of that, it might persist for the rest of your life, where little things might trigger you. It might not be massive, but little tiny things might set you off if they remind you of the trauma. It could be, right? It depends. It's tricky because sometimes it feels like it overlaps with phobias a little bit, right? But it tends to have a slightly different presentation where you are very like on edge and hyper vigilant, oftentimes having flashbacks and nightmares. Right. Yeah. And so there are some things in common. It can definitely kind of lead to a phobia as well. And they can end up kind of going together. But if you can face it and work through it, people tend to be pretty successful in minimizing the symptoms of it over time. And it might just fade over time naturally too. As time passes, people tend to kind of have it mellow out a little. So some of the symptoms that people have, right, you tend to kind of be haunted by whatever happened to you, right? You re-experience the event. You have nightmares of it, flashbacks of it, hallucinations even sometimes of the event or whatever it is that happened to you that was traumatic. You tend to avoid anything that reminds you of it, right? So if you got into an awful car accident, you might not get in the car anymore. You might not want to drive because you want to avoid whatever happened to you in the past. Maybe something bad happened at night. You might not want to go out at night. You tend to avoid anything that reminds you of the event. Sometimes people get really kind of closed off and withdrawn, and their responsiveness gets really low. It's almost like they're caught up in their own mind, in their own private world. Other times people get what we can call hypervigilant. Right. And they're almost always on edge, right? Every little thing sets them off, hard to relax, hard to calm down. It's like a level of increased arousal where they're always jumpy and on edge with things. And it can sometimes lead to anger and anxiety and guilt and irritability, struggles with sleeping. This tends to be something that can be very, very affecting for a while. And then over time tends to mellow out a little bit, especially, as I said, if people have tried to tackle the trauma through therapy or something like that. And I have a clip, an example of this, and it's somebody who was in a combat situation, but you don't see any of the combat in here, but just to put that out there. But it's from the movie American Sniper. There's a lot of great portrayals of this in the media. I always think of The Punisher, the show The Punisher. The main character had PTSD. There's another one, Brothers, where the guy comes home from war and had PTSD. Katniss from Hunger Games, I think, is another great example of someone with PTSD. But let me show you this little clip. And what you'll see in it, what you see in that clip, I think it's a really good portrayal. Like, he's checked out, right? He's not mentally there in those moments, right? You can see him just sitting there, not really paying attention or listening. His mind is somewhere else. His mind is on the trauma. And as he's sitting there in that chair, right in the living room, just hearing the sounds of combat, kind of re-experiencing the trauma, right? Because it's on his mind. It's very, very common with this disorder that, again, it kind of haunts you. It sticks with you even long after the event has passed. And it can be triggered, as I said, by anything, any kind of event that is considered traumatic. It can even be secondary trauma. I had a client that I worked with years ago at this point, but her girlfriend had been attacked at night getting into her car. And my client developed like a secondary trauma from it and was afraid to go out at night out of fear that she would get attacked getting into her car. So it can be something that happens to you or other people around you, but that tends to be how it appears. And again, it's something that tends to be very kind of long lasting. And the tricky thing is a trauma by itself is enough to cause a disorder, but not everybody who experiences trauma develops a disorder from it. A lot of people experience something traumatic, but they don't develop PTSD or ASD, and they're okay. And there's a lot of factors that we kind of look at as a way to see why some people might experience it and others might not. We don't really know, but we have lots of thoughts, of course. One of them being biological and genetics factors. Trauma and the way that we respond to anxiety and stress and traumatic events tends to be somewhat genetic. We tend to inherit a little bit of like anxiety sensitivity. How anxious do we tend to get? And it can also be a little bit of how much like norepinephrine and different neurotransmitters we're releasing into our system that might dictate how well you cope with anything stressful or traumatic. Your personality also plays a role, right? How resilient are you? Some people can handle a lot of stress. They can handle maybe more than like multiple people combined, and other people crumble at the smallest amount of stress. And so how resilient you are, how much you can handle, how you tend to view things and cope with things can also play a big role. Freud talked a lot about how when you experience trauma as a child, or you've had a difficult upbringing, that you might tend to be more prone to trauma as an adult. Social support is kind of a protective factor, right? So if you have a lot of people in your life that you can rely on and talk to, so if something bad happens to you and you have good social support in your family or friends or so on, that tends to be a protective factor in helping minimize the impact of that trauma. Yeah.
Something specifically say we have some sort of other issue. If we were a child, it causes like so much stress that getting causes something like this.
Sure. So there is actually, there's a side disorder. Okay, so it's not actually a disorder yet, but it is something that is gaining a lot of popularity. And it's been added to the Europe's version of the DSM, which is called the ICD, and it's called CPTSD, or sometimes developmental trauma. Developmental trauma disorder. Okay, so CPTSD is something that's thought to be rooted in childhood. So oftentimes when people with PTSD, what we have is like one traumatic event, right? CPTSD tends to be when people have had like things happen in childhood that are ongoing, like neglect or abuse or difficult things when they're younger. And that might put you more at risk for developing like PTSD-like symptoms later. So I actually had wanted to mention this, I'm glad you asked, but when people have things that happen to them when they're younger, when they're developing as a child, it tends to make them more vulnerable to mental illness later in life. So it can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be like stress or trauma, but if people have like a difficult upbringing, it might make them just more vulnerable to mental illness later on, at least from that model or that perspective. But just as a side note, right, this is kind of something that I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the next DSM. It's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's what the CD stands for. People who experience ongoing trauma, specifically during childhood, like neglect or abuse, or maybe like a difficult circumstance when they're younger, is thought to be its own presentation, right? Somebody who has kind of ongoing issues related to this. Not a disorder right now, but it wouldn't shock me to see it in the DSM-6 one day, whenever that comes out, maybe 5-10 years from now. Multicultural factors can play a role. People who grew up in low like socioeconomic status, high degrees of poverty, tend to have a higher vulnerability to PTSD and stress disorders. And then the severity of the trauma. The more severe the trauma, the more likely you might be to develop a disorder from it, right? So all of these things can kind of have protective elements like your personality, your social support, or maybe make you more vulnerable to developing a disorder. But not everyone who experiences trauma will develop PTSD. A lot of people are okay. Maybe they react for a time and then they're all right afterward. And others have PTSD and it lingers for years, if not for a long time. Lots of different treatments for PTSD and ASD and stress disorders. As I mentioned earlier, right, you were asking how long this can last. Traditionally, people need to come to grips with the traumatic event in order to get better. And one way of doing that, there's a type of therapy that's very specific to PTSD and trauma, and it's called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And on the surface, this seems kind of silly, but it's gained a lot of popularity in the last 10 years. It's actually become scientifically validated. It didn't used to be, but it's something that we're using a lot for trauma. And the idea behind it is that you're using something called bilateral stimulation. Bilateral stimulation, which can be done through the eyes. It can be done with little tappers that maybe you hold in your hands, like little buzzers or tappers, or it can be done with sounds when you put headphones on that alternate back and forth. But through some kind of bilateral stimulation of the brain, activating both sides and having somebody think about a traumatic event, it's thought that you can process it in a different way. The idea behind EMDR is that traumas get stuck. It's like they're not processed and absorbed into the brain like every other memory. And so by doing a procedure like this, you unstick them, right? It's almost like they're dissolved in a way and able to kind of be absorbed into the brain. And it's thought that people get over them faster using this method. And I have a little video that talks about how this is done and kind of what it looks like. So I'll play that for you. It's something I found on like YouTube, but I think it's super helpful. Typically what happens is they develop a negative belief around the event, a negative cognition, right? So maybe it's, I have no control or I'm powerless, right? And so then the positive belief might be something like, I have control now, or I have power now. Like I didn't have it then, but I have it now. And through going through and desensitizing the trauma over and over and over again, thinking about it while having that bilateral stimulation, over time, your what they call subjective units of distress, right, or SUDS, starts to drop. And you experience less distress when you think about the trauma. And that positive belief becomes more and more true, and the negative one less and less true. And so over time, and this can take some time to do, people start to get better and that trauma tends to fade. With one single traumatic event, this can take multiple sessions, up to a couple of months even, depending on how often you go. If it's a complex trauma and something that's been ongoing for years, this can take quite some time to do. But it is a very common approach to kind of desensitizing somebody to a traumatic event and reprocessing the way that they think about it. Really unique. I had the opportunity to do like a big training on this and one session on it when I was training to become a therapist. And I was so skeptical because it sounds so silly, right? You're going to sit there and follow somebody's fingers back and forth for like 20 minutes while thinking about something. But it does tend to be something that is successful for a lot of people, specifically for PTSD. So talking it through in therapy, considering something like EMDR, when people do those things, they tend to get quite a bit better and the trauma tends to fade, especially over time. All right. Before I go to the next group here, any other like comments or questions or thoughts or anything else with PTSD, ASD, and EMDR? Let me see how many acronyms I can give you in one sentence, right? It's like alphabet soup, right, with all of this. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. So the other part of this chapter is on a rare group of disorders, but they're super interesting. They're called the dissociative disorders. And this is an umbrella term for like a group of disorders underneath it. And these dissociative disorders tend to be involving memory loss, parts of your personality being separated from the others, or even the presence of multiple identities or multiple personalities. Again, not super common, but they are things that occur, and they're very rooted in trauma and extreme stress. So we'll talk a little bit about the dissociative amnesias, and then dissociative identity disorder as kind of two of the bigger ones that fall into this cluster. But again, a lot of memory loss, changes of identity, or maybe even multiple identities present within one person. By far the most common in this group is something called dissociative amnesia. So this is when somebody has memory loss for past events without an organic cause. I'm sure you've all seen like movies or heard cases, like I always think of like The Vow or 50 First Dates, or like there's a bunch of them, right? Where people hit their head and then they have memory loss. That is called retrograde amnesia, where people have a brain trauma that leads to memory loss. We can also have a psychological trauma that leads to memory loss. And that is the case of what we're looking at here. So this is somebody who has memory loss without a physical or organic cause. The cause of the loss of memory is psychological and very trauma-based. And there are 5 main ways that this can present. And this would be, for example, a great short answer question, right? What are the 5 main types of dissociative amnesia? That would be another great one that I may or may not and will ask you. I should just say I will ask you, right? On the exam. So localized, selective, generalized, continuous, and dissociative fugue. And I won't ask you the difference between the first four because they're a little bit overlapping and it's not super clear. But I might ask you a little more about this last one that's its own key term down here. Well, what happens is somebody experiences a traumatic event and then they have memory loss as a result. Oftentimes, this is almost like a repression, right? Like you block out elements of the trauma because it's too much for you to handle. And so let's say somebody has something traumatic to them, like this is really common after 9/11, right? A lot of people talked about their amnesia for the events after like being in the Twin Towers right after that happened. Localized would be that it begins with the event. So I remember the plane crashing into the building, but I remember nothing after that. Everything after that is just completely a blur and I can't remember, right? So localized means it starts with the event and then everything after that happened is just kind of forgotten. And it might come back later, but for a time it's blocked out, repressed, or just kind of not available to you. Yeah. It's a specific type of amnesia. So there's different types. There's something called retrograde amnesia. And that's when people have like a head trauma that leads to memory loss. So yeah, so amnesia just means like loss of memory. Okay. And so there are different types of amnesia. This one, dissociative amnesia means that it's due to a psychological trauma versus like retrograde would be a physical trauma. So there's just different types of amnesia. I'm glad you asked. Selective, probably the easiest one to understand. You remember bits and pieces. So you remember how you got out of the building, but not what happened after that, right? You remember a car hitting you, but not how you got out of the car or got to the hospital. It's like you remember little bits and pieces of the trauma, but not all of it. The next two are really rare. Generalized is when people tend to remember only after an event, but not before. They forget everything that happened to them before a trauma. They might even forget their identity, right? So it can be something where they can't remember anything like years and years back before a traumatic event. Really, really rare, but it definitely does happen. Is that a?
What was the one where you remember like that's right before like
everything afterward? That would be localized, okay. The first one. And I won't ask you the difference between these four because it's not always perfect, but.
It would be over forget everything that happened.
Sure.
Each time I play is festival.
Right.
I play and the game's over and look at the phone.
Sure. Right. And maybe you were in like a blur of it. I mean, this is due to more like trauma or extreme stress. I mean, if it was really stressful to you, that might make sense. Like that could be the case. Sometimes when things are stressful, we just kind of end up blocking them out. It could also be an attention thing. I'm sure all of you have had this moment. It's frightening to think how often this happens, but you've been driving for like 5-10 minutes and you go, oh, how did I get here? Right? Like that happens to everyone. Some of you smiling, right? Like it's a miracle we all get where we're going, right? Because it happens a lot. I mean, it happened to me yesterday. I was driving home and I'm like, oh, I'm here, right? Like, how did I get here? I don't remember the last 10 minutes. We can sometimes enter into like a hypnotic state where you're like subconsciously aware of the environment around you, but not consciously. So it could be a couple of different things, but we have weird things with our consciousness. That happens to all of us. It's almost like a pseudo hypnotic state in a way. Was that a, yeah?
So we generalize, it's forget everything happened before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, you'd still remember the trauma and everything after, but you might forget who you are and everything that happened before the traumatic event. Really rare. But it is something that can happen. And again, it tends to come back. All of these tend to come back. It just might take a little time for that to happen. And then the continuous is when you forget into the present, right? So you aren't able to store like new memories after a traumatic event. Like even in the current moment, you're still struggling to remember stuff after a traumatic event. So again, I won't ask you the difference, but I might ask you to list these five, or I will ask you to list these five. And then the dissociative fugue is its own really unique type of amnesia. And I have a clip I want to show you on this because it pops up in the news every now and then. And when it does, I was really excited to find one example of it because it's pretty rare. But fugue is Latin for flight. like not literally to take a plane, but like to flee, right? Or run away from something. And with a dissociative fugue, people who are under extreme stress or maybe even have a trauma oftentimes take off from their home, traveling quite a distance away, states over, oftentimes in a car or maybe even on a plane, it could be. And they forget their lives and start a brand new life with a completely new identity. And this doesn't tend to be long lasting because they don't have the documentation to support this new life and new identity and name that they've formed. But oftentimes they completely forget who they are. And they can be very confused and lost and have no idea where they are in that moment. And there have been awful cases. There was one in the news, gosh, this was like 10 years ago. This woman was about to get married, and the stress of the wedding caused her to enter into a dissociative fugue state. She drove 4 states over, started dating some new guy. And when like her fiance found her, she had been like in a relationship with this other guy for a week and all this drama, right? And she had no memory of her past identity. Really rare, but people who have this, it tends to happen repeatedly. It tends to be almost like their coping mechanism for dealing with stress. And the video that I found of this was a case of a guy who drove states away and then had no idea who he was. So he went to the news asking if anyone could help identify him. And that's something that can happen. And your memory does tend to come back, especially in like little bits and pieces. Like people have this sense that things aren't right and something is wrong because they have incomplete information. But it's wild. This is again, very rare, but it's a great example of like a disassociated state. So let me play this up. And that wasn't the first time that it happened to him. So it tends to be something that, again, is rooted in like a lot of stress or even something traumatic. People assume a partial or complete new identity. And it oftentimes is discovered quicker and quicker and quicker because of just the nature of like how much identity stuff you need to have, or you need to have an ID, you need to have documentation for stuff. And so people tend to be discovered relatively quickly, but it can take some time if they've ditched all of that stuff and just taken off. Yeah.
On the gas station, there's one dude who's saying he doesn't remember being born. He said like he thought he's just spawned out of nowhere.
So that's an odd thing to say, right? And I mean, most of us don't remember our birth, right? We can't remember, for the most part, it's hard to remember before the age of 2. It's very common. Like, just think about it later today. Try and think back. Very rare that you can remember before like 2 or 3 years of age for anybody. But that is kind of an odd thing to say. So maybe something going on there. I don't know if it's this, but it would definitely be interesting to know more, right? Strange, odd thing to say for sure. Right? The other one in here, me. For the next slide here. This one is something I think more people are familiar with, but again, relatively rare. Dissociative identity disorder. Anyone know what this used to be called? It's gone by a couple of different names over time. Yeah. Yeah, there's one more. Anyone know what the other one is? Multiple personality disorder or no? Yeah. Well, that's a good guess. That's actually a personality disorder that we'll talk about. Split personality disorder. The other one is a good guess though. So split or multiple personality disorder, this one was renamed in the current DSM to reflect the thought that it's not thought that you have full personalities, but more like disassociated fragments of identities that are present. The idea with this disorder is that you have 2 or more personalities or identities that are routinely taking over your physical being. So this is somebody who has multiple personalities or multiple identities. Most common to have like 2, 3, maybe 4. The highest number of documented cases ever was 126. 126 different personalities, but usually it's like 3 to 5 is kind of the common range. And this is almost exclusively related to trauma. All right, Freud called it like an extreme repression. Something traumatic happens to you, typically during childhood, and you repress that memory and create another identity that can handle the trauma. Oftentimes the identities have a purpose, right? So maybe somebody experienced something really traumatic, and so they create another identity that didn't experience that trauma, and that person can then survive and be okay. And the tricky thing with this is the relationship between the identities really dictates how this person functions. So a person who has this has multiple sub-personalities or sub-identities within their physical being. And what can happen is they can switch into these different personalities routinely. And the personalities can be very different. Like you might have one that's older and one that's younger, one that's male, one that's female. They might have different memories, different interests, different hobbies, all sorts of different things about them, different mannerisms even. And so what can happen is people can have an incredible amount of memory loss with this disorder, because if they don't share memories, you only remember what happens when you are a certain personality. So what we get is kind of three general types of relationships that can be present between these different sub-personalities. They can be mutually amnesic, mutually cognizant, or one-way amnesic. And what this means, if they're mutually amnesic, that means that they have no awareness of each other. So personality A doesn't know about B, and B doesn't know about C, and C doesn't know about F, right? None of them know that they're sub-personalities. And by far, that is the most difficult to work with because they don't share memories. So when person is personality A, they remember everything that happened to them as A. And then when they're B, they remember everything that happened to them as when they were personality B. But they don't share any memory. So there's a lot of confusion, blackouts, memory lapses that occur. And when you're trying to treat this individual, you have to wait for each personality to emerge and have the same conversation with each one of them. It can be very, very difficult when none of them know about each other. It's by far the most complicated. The second one, when they're mutually cognizant, they all know about each other. And this is the easiest. If they all know about each other, A knows about B and B knows about C and so on. They share memories. And you can actually ask a personality to come forward. Can I talk to personality B? And that person can switch to that personality because they all are aware of each other. So this one is the easiest by far to deal with because there's less memory loss. But the most common presentation is the third one-way amnesic. And what that means is there's one dominant personality, and that dominant personality knows about all the subs, but the subs don't know about each other. So when you're the dominant personality, you have all of the memories, you have everything at your disposal. But when you're any of the sub-personalities, you might not share any or have any knowledge or awareness of what's going on. Now, this tends to be something that's super controversial. A lot of people tend to think it's being faked, but it's been pretty well documented to be a real disorder. And we've even done like brain scans and fMRIs and all sorts of different things on people as they switch personalities. And they tend to have different brainwave patterns and activities and all sorts of stuff. It's pretty wild, and it's almost always in response to trauma. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, right? And I'm not sure that we can answer it. It's not super common that it's a different language, but what is really common is maybe one of the personalities is very childlike and speaks like a child and acts like a child. And then one is an adult and speaks and acts like an adult. You see that a lot more than other languages, but it might be possible that at some point in that person's history, they did have knowledge of another language that they have forgotten, and that personality would have awareness of it. And that's kind of the best explanation for stuff like that. But yeah, it can be all sorts of strange and bizarre things like that that can happen, different mannerisms and everything. I want to point one thing out too, and before I forget to mention it, this is very different than schizophrenia. And we'll talk about schizophrenia later in the semester, but dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia are completely different. With schizophrenia, you only have one personality, but the connections among your thoughts are disordered. They're kind of fragmented. People hallucinate and have delusions. We'll talk about that a lot later. This one, people have two or more personalities, but they don't tend to hallucinate or have delusions. It's more just different identities within one person. Now, the media loves to combine them to make it dramatic, like Fight Club. If you've ever seen Fight Club, they kind of combine schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder together. Very commonly done in movies, but they're very different disorders. This one is two or more personalities, doesn't tend to have hallucinations or delusions, tends to be more just fragmented identities. And I will tell you, in all of my years being involved in psychology, I've only seen this once. It's pretty rare, but I had a client who had this disorder. And I think a couple of you have maybe heard this story, but I'm going to share it anyway. I had a client who had this disorder and didn't know it. And it was like one of the wildest things I've experienced in the psychological lens. My very first semester in graduate school, I was training to be a therapist. And I had literally, one of my very first clients had dissociative identity disorder, and she didn't know it, and I didn't know. And it was wild, and I will never forget it because it was so crazy. So I saw this young woman, she was like 19, 20, right? Really timid, mousy, like depressed. She was struggling with being away at college and not having a lot of friends, missing her family. I saw her for like 6 weeks. Every time she came in, really quiet, shy, reserved, depressed, having a hard time. I diagnosed her with depression, and everything was kind of on like this very constant trajectory. And then week 7 or 8, somewhere in there, she came in and was like a completely different person that day. She was really up and animated. She was talking about people she had never mentioned before, like a million miles a minute, fidgety. And in my mind, I was like, oh, she has bipolar disorder, and I'm seeing the manic side for the first time. Sometimes that happens. You can see a client for months and not see the whole picture. And so sometimes the diagnosis changes, right? And I was like, okay, I think I'm seeing a manic episode. She's acting very differently. When you're a therapist trainee, you're videotaped and you have a supervisor. And after every session, you have to check in with your supervisor, tell them about the session. And I did that, and we decided together she had bipolar disorder, and I moved on. I didn't think much of it. But she came in the next session, and the first thing she said to me was, I want to apologize for not coming last week. And I was like, oh, well, you were here, but I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to talk to you. You were really different last week. And she was back to quiet and shy and timid and depressed again, like I had known for the time being. And she's like, no, I didn't come last week. I'm really sorry. That's not like me. Like I wouldn't miss like our time. It means a lot to me. I'm sorry. And I was like, no, you did come. And like I pulled out my notes and I'm like, talk about this and this and this and this and this. And she's like, I'm really sorry, but you have me confused with somebody else. I don't know who those people are. And I think maybe you have the wrong person. Like trying to be super polite, right? And I'm trying to be super polite. And I'm like, no, yeah, you know, this is what we talked about. I wanted to be like, I'm not the one in therapy here. You are. Like, I know what I'm talking about. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm pretty sure we're here. And we went back and forth for like 10 minutes. We were just like butting heads. It was like, you were here, we talked about this. No, it wasn't, that's not me. Right? We couldn't move forward. And my gut told me that this was important, right? Like this is something that we needed to explore more. And I was like, if you don't mind, I'm going to go get the videotape from last time and let's watch it, right? Because you were here and it concerns me that you don't remember that you were here, right? Like, again, as polite as possible, right? But basically, I'm going to prove to you were here, right? Like, I'm right. I know I'm right. And we go get the videotape, and my supervisor came in as well because this was really abnormal. And so we come in and play the video, and she was there. She made me doubt it for a minute, right? She was there and she starts crying. She's like, that's me, but I don't remember that. I don't remember being here. I don't, who am I talking about? What did I wear? That's me, but she was so confused. She starts sobbing. She's like, I have no idea what's going on. And I had no idea what was going on. It's the wildest thing. I was just like, this is why I love psychology, right? This is crazy. And it turned out that she had been having blackouts all these periods of time that she wasn't remembering what happened to her. And that day she remembered nothing about that day, but she had switched to another personality that was extroverted and outgoing that she had created to help deal with the stress of being off at college. And it turned out she had been doing this more and more and more. And I just had never seen it up till that point. Really wild. So we figured that she had this other identity present. She was really upset. And I never got to see her again. It was the hardest thing for me as like a person and a therapist. I had to refer her out to someone who could actually like had the expertise to help her. And I never got to follow up, which was really sad. I wonder to this day, like what happened. But that's the one time in my life that I've seen this in person. And she was so genuinely confused by what was going on and just crying from it. That it like completely eliminated any doubt I've ever had about this disorder. So just to share that with you, again, this is relatively rare, but she had a situation where they didn't know about each other. And so memory loss, she would have these big periods of time where she couldn't remember what had happened to her. And that's relatively common with this disorder. And again, I still wonder today, like, I wonder how she's doing. Like, I'll never know because I had to refer her out to somebody else. very common with this that you might have somebody keep a journal, and you can sometimes even see different handwriting styles in the journal, right? Like different personalities tend to write and express themselves differently. And so that was one thing that like, I know that she probably would have been encouraged to do is keep a journal to help recover some of those lapses in memory. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I remember looking it up. I was curious. Somebody asked me years ago what the record number of personalities was, but I'm not sure if they knew about each other or not. It's a great question. I'll see if I can find out because that would be interesting to know. If they did, it would make it much easier. And if they didn't, that'd be really tricky to help cope with, for sure. Any other thoughts or anything? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it can change over time. One of my favorite shows, it's not on anymore, but I don't know if any of you watched Bates Motel when it was on. It was about young Norman Bates from Psycho, and they portrayed him as somebody with dissociative identity disorder. And he starts out with no awareness that he's switching personalities. Whenever he switches personalities, he commits murder, right? So whenever he's like sexually turned on or stressed out, he switches to a personality that's like a version of his mother and commits murders. And he doesn't remember them because he wasn't himself. As the show progresses, he starts to get more awareness that he's doing it. And so it can definitely change over time. Really cool like portrayal of this. It's not perfect, but it was really, really interesting. It's over now, so I'm sure you can find it easily. But Bates Motel was a cool portrayal. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you haven't seen Moon Knight, it's a really great portrayal.
Really? Okay, I have it. What's it called?
Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. I'll write it down. Ooh, nice. And any excuse to watch Disney Plus. Okay, I'll take it. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of movies and shows portraying this, but I'll have to check that one out. I wrote it down. Did you have a
person
yeah. And I've wondered about that for years. So I'm glad that you asked that, because for years I was like, how did she know to come to therapy then? Like, because I'd never met that alter, that other personality, but she showed up to therapy, seemed familiar and comfortable with me. So it might have been that they did share some awareness that she just wasn't aware of yet, because she clearly still came. And it wasn't like she was like, who are you? You know, like she knew who I was. So, yeah, I wonder about that to this day. Like they clearly had a little bit of shared awareness or consciousness in order for her to be able to do that. Yeah.
You asked her.
No, because she couldn't remember. She couldn't remember at all where she was that entire day, which is wild. She just had complete memory loss for that whole day. Yeah, that's the nature of these disorders. There's a lot of memory loss involved. Kind of a smaller side note, but I want to mention these are elements that can pop up in multiple disorders, like panic attacks. When we talked about them, they tend to have a little bit of these as well. But kind of an element of multiple disorders, depersonalization and derealization. These are things that can happen for people. Depersonalization is when you feel like your body or maybe even your mind or parts of who you are aren't your own. So maybe that guy at the gas station, maybe this was someone he didn't feel like he was connected to himself in some way. So when people don't feel connected to their own person, right, we call that depersonalization. And derealization is when your surroundings feel unreal. That's a very common thing people experience during panic attacks. The world around them feels fuzzy or blurry or unreal, like it's moving at a different speed or time than usual. So these are elements you can have what's called depersonalization, derealization disorder, where these are kind of the defining elements of what's going on, or these can be parts of other disorders as well. All right, so just kind of one side note to mention that sometimes people feel like the world around them is unreal, or themselves aren't actually themselves, right? Which can sometimes happen as well. A little bit rare, but they can be elements of different disorders, almost like an out-of-body experience of not feeling connected to the world around you. One last thought as we kind of get close to the end here. How do we treat all of these different things and what causes them? And again, they're almost exclusively related to trauma. People experience something traumatic and they block it out. Right? They experience something traumatic and they have memory loss for it. Very, very common to have that be the explanation. Freud would have said that it's an extreme repression. But a lot of ideas here, we're talking about like just literally like, it's like you shut off that part, right? And when we look at things like hypnosis, we can divide our consciousness, right? Sometimes consciously or unconsciously. And so we sometimes use things like hypnotherapy and talk therapy to try and work on this. But when we're treating dissociative identity disorder or DID, there's kind of three main goals. And this is a long process. It's not an easy one. There's no medication or drug to cure this. But you have to help a client recognize the nature of their disorder first. And if the personalities aren't aware of each other, you might have to educate each individual personality one at a time and wait for each one to come forward and explain it to them. And that can be tedious and take a long time. If they're all aware of each other, you explain it once and all of the personalities know. That's way, way easier. You try and recover gaps in memory, oftentimes journaling, right? Kind of writing things down so you can be aware of what's going on. And then you try and find a way to integrate the personalities. Each one of them has a purpose. And so if we can fuse them together and eliminate some of them, then people can have less personalities and tend to do a little bit better. As a side note, there's a really cool movie called Identity. It has John Cusack as like the main person in it. It's probably like 15 years old at this point, but it's a good, creepy, scary movie, good for this time of year. But it's all about this. I don't want to like give it away just in case you want to watch it. But the whole movie is kind of like a really cool psychological twist on what we're talking about. And it very much gets at this idea of integrating and fusion and unexpectedly so. It looks like a scary movie and it's kind of got a twist to it. So I'll put that out there in case you're looking for something fun to watch. You gave me one, I'll give you one back, right? But really difficult to treat. This can take some time as you have to fuse them together, educate that person, and then help them to recover the gaps in memory. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's so I mean, the idea is you get them down to as few as possible, right? So like if you can go from 5 to 2, I mean, ideally 1. Yeah, you want to try and limit them. If you can get rid of their purpose, right? Like that client that I had, she developed that personality to be more extroverted and help her socially. So if you could teach her better social skills, that personality might not be needed anymore. And so that's kind of the idea of how can we get rid of them and fuse them together. So really quickly, I know we're out of time, but don't forget on Thursday, I will not see you here at Adam. We won't have class. I'll post an announcement just in case you forget. But we won't have class. Make sure you take that exam at some point during the day, whether it's right now or at any point before 11:59 p.m. And then you will get a grade right away, except for the short answer questions, because I have to grade those manually. But you'll get a score right away, not including those. And then I'll be grading those as they come in. So good luck on the test. You'll all do beautifully. I'm hoping you all do wonderfully on it and you feel good about it. And then I will see you on Tuesday next week when we'll start our next unit. So have a wonderful weekend. Good luck on the test, and I'll see you next week.